This is a very exciting video because it is the first piece of content that I have recorded in my brand new garden office. I've waited so long to be able to say that out loud. It is finished, and I thought, what better way to celebrate the end of what has been a fairly long journey of this office coming to life than with a good old Q&A episode to not just show you the space, but also tell you more about the process of building and creating a garden office. So whether you're just nosy or you're thinking about doing it yourself, this can act as a central point for lots of key information. You might have seen already, I've posted a tour over on my socials. So if you want to go and watch what is a slightly chaotic walkthrough of all of the different spaces, then feel free to go and watch that. But I will be overlaying some clips of the space as I'm talking so that you can get a really good look at the space that I'm in. If, by the way, this is your first time coming over to my YouTube channel, please make sure to subscribe. I post all of the podcast episodes here in video format, and also vlogs are the behind the scenes of my business. So if you enjoy this kind of content, subscribe so that you can stick around. There's a lot of juicy podcast episodes coming over the next few weeks. But without further ado, let's dive into the first question, which is, what was my vision for this space? Now, we started talking about having a garden office before we purchased this flat. The backstory is that back in June, we completed on this flat, we being me and my partner, RSM. And when we were looking for flats, we thought we needed a 2-bed. In fact, we didn't think that, we knew that. We were like, we need a 2-bed because I need an office space. I've been in business for the last 9 years, and over those 9 years, it's always been a non-negotiable for me to have a space that is dedicated to my business. More on that later, why that's such a non-negotiable for me. And when we were searching, we offered on a few flats and it didn't quite feel right, even though they were a 2-bed. And then bit of a wildcard option, RSM found this flat, which is actually a 1-bed. Now it's a bit of a unicorn because it was a 1-bed with a massive basement and also quite a large garden, which where we are in London is not easy to come by. And so from day one of viewing this flat, we were like, this would work for us if we had a garden office. Now that was June of last year, so over a year ago. So over that period, I've had a lot of time to think about what I want from this space and what I would need from an office space that I'm able to design from scratch, which is a huge privilege to be able to do that. And when I was thinking, I kept coming back to the idea of just having these 2 key areas. It's not a massive room, it's about 2 by 3 meters, but there's really 2 key things I need from this space. Firstly, a desk area that feels spacious and is an area that I can just sit down and get straight to work, have everything I need at my fingertips and be really focused. And then secondly, a comfy, cozy area where I can record content, sit down with a client, sit on my phone, have a little scroll, and basically just kind of have a bit of a break from always be staring at my screens. And my wonderful editor Em will, as I'm speaking, be putting some of these shots on top so you can see what these final spaces look like. That was the vision, and that is exactly what we've created. I absolutely love the feel of this room. Alongside those 2 key areas, there's also some really nice touches like a gallery wall, which basically tells the story of my whole business. It's full of different highlights and moments. I've got old cards up there from clients and team members. I've got my first business cards. I've got photos of key milestones. So that's really nice to look at. Overall, it just feels like a space that is cozy, on brand, and calm. Like I wanted a space that when I walked into it, I was like, this is where I come to work, and it feels elevated. It makes me feel like I'm doing good stuff and working towards a big vision. And I can firmly say that all of those boxes have been ticked. Now, moving on then to another key question, which is one that I've definitely wrestled with over the last 14 months, which is why a garden office versus an external office that you can hire and have? And I can answer this question quite confidently because I tried that and still ended up deciding to go down this route. We knew that this garden office wasn't going to happen quickly. Not gonna lie, I thought it would happen quicker than it did. Thought it would take maybe a few months rather than over a year. But when I knew that I was going to have a few months of no office space, I looked into an external office, and I actually ended up signing a 3-month contract for a co-working space that's just down the road from me, and I had a set room in that co-working space. That worked. I definitely felt the benefit of just like having a set area, but for me, the commute, and it was like a 10-minute cycle. When I say commute, it's a very baby commute. It just created friction where I felt it didn't need to be. like feeling like there was this constant like, oh, I'd love to go and do a quick bit of work, but, or like, oh, I need to get from here to here, but, you know, it just felt like it added in more work and obviously used up more of my time. So that kind of helped me realize that it wasn't really for me. And obviously the other thing being like, you know, rent is great. I actually love renting, but it is just kind of continually giving that money away. Whereas if I were to add up the money that was costing me over a year, that would actually have then paid for most of this garden office being built, which obviously is going to be here a lot longer than a year and add value to our property as well. So for me, it just made sense. I want a space that I can really easily get to from my kind of home environment. But actually, it's so fun it being in the garden because my commute is like 15 steps long. In the past, I've always had an office space in the house, like as a second bedroom. And so this just feels like the best of both worlds. It's like separate, but literally zero commute time. And I can jump between personal Alice and work Alice incredibly easily. So that was our thinking with going for a garden office over a hired space. And actually after that 3-month contract, I just ended up working from a little corner of our living room to A, save money, and B, not have to have that commute whilst we were waiting for the garden office to be built. So speaking of the garden office being built, let's get to the next question, which is what was the process? Now, this is obviously going to vary depending on what it is you're building and how you're choosing to build it, but we went down the route of building the garden office ourselves. We are in a very fortunate position where both my dad and RSM, my partner's dad, have built their own garden offices. And not just built their own garden offices, they've built the same garden office from the exact brand that we were buying our garden office from. So we kind of had these two people that had done it that we could like ask questions to, learn from, and most importantly, get help with the build. My partner RSM is very handy. It's something I'm incredibly grateful for. I'm super enthusiastic, but I wouldn't say I always have the attention to detail or the focus needed to do good construction work. I'm the one that you bring in at the end just to like, you know, take some messy action and get things done. So we just knew from day one, like, yeah, we want to build this. Obviously, we also saved a lot of money by building it ourselves, which I'll get to in the next question. For us, there was quite a lot that had to happen before we could order it and build. We live in a conservation area in London, which comes with lots of fun challenges. One being that we had to get planning permission for this garden office, whereas usually you wouldn't have to. We had to get planning permission, which took about 3 months. And before we even got that planning permission, we had to get tree surveys for what can only be described as shrubs. It was the most frustrating way to spend our time and money, but we did it by the book so that, you know, everything is properly done. But that took a good few months, just getting all of our kind of ducks in a row. Now, blessing in disguise, that did also mean that we could save money and make sure kind of financially that we were ready for this. In terms of the time of year, it just then ended up being that spring this year was when it made sense to kind of begin prepping for the garden office to be built. So I would break our process down into kind of 4 key stages. Stage 1 is like the planning permission, the prep, getting ready. Stage 2 was then ordering the garden office. When we pressed order, you can have the foundations arrive early. So RSM sorted out the foundations and basically made sure that everything was ready to go. That then allowed us on the 1st of August, the first day of my month off, to have the garden office then be fully delivered, ready to be built. Now, this is the stage where I was a little bit MIA. I actually left to go on a trip the day the garden office arrived. A, because it was my month off and I was due to go on a trip, but B, for previous reasons already mentioned, I wasn't necessarily going to be most helpful in those first few days. So the dad stepped in. That stage took about 4 to 5 days to actually get the shell of the office built. It went incredibly quickly. She says, as the person that came in 4 days later and just saw it being built. Obviously, there was a ton of work involved. There were long days. RSM worked incredibly hard. But you might be surprised actually how quickly something like this can be put up. And I've actually posted a few videos on Instagram of like the process of the build if you want to go and see some of that. But that was the 3rd stage. And then that enabled us to move into the 4th stage, which was kind of all of the interiors. So plastering, painting, flooring, installing all of the furniture, lighting, fixtures and fittings, all of that fun stuff, which is very much where I came in and pulled my weight a lot more. But start to end, in terms of kind of the build, we got this done in just over a month. And that featured quite a few breaks and holidays because it was August. So I would pretty confidently say if you had like 10 days to solidly do it, you could build this in that time, which I just think is mad. Like, it's like a proper room. It's like a tiny little house. So yeah, if you have the skills and the willingness to put in the work, the process can be done yourself. And obviously the biggest benefit of that is the savings. So let's get to the question that people probably want to know the answer to the most. How much did it cost? I've done the calculations. I'm going to tell you all of the numbers, all about transparency here, because I think it's actually really good value. Now, that's obviously a relative thing. You might hear these numbers and be like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of money. That's completely fair enough. But when I compare it to what it would cost to do an extension on our flat or rearrange our flat in order to get another bedroom out for my office, or B, the cost of having an external office space for the time that we're going to be living here, it is so worth it. So let's break it down and we'll go from start to end. We had to spend around £1,500 on our tree survey and our planning application. You might not need to do that, but that was our first cost. A very annoying cost, but a cost all the same. Then the garden office itself, and I'm going to do rounded numbers here, but including the foundations and, like the doors, but, nothing inside the garden office. You still have to buy your own floorings and lighting and everything like that, was, I believe, just under £8,000. So that's obviously the biggest expense for basically buying the frame and what is kind of like IKEA flat pack, but just on a really, really big scale. When you compare that to the cost of someone else coming and building something like this, you're talking more like £20,000 to £25,000. So there is a very significant saving in building it yourself. Obviously, the trade-off being you have to build it yourself, but we enjoyed that journey. So £8,000 for the office itself, and then you've got some costs for kind of the other bits and bobs that you kind of need to just do to get it livable. So not including furniture, we ended up spending about £600 to get it plastered so that it looks nice inside. We probably ended up spending about £500 on light fixtures and the flooring, which I laid myself, by the way. I laid a floor. It looks great. Feel free to zoom in on any of my videos and just look at the amazing floor. And if you don't think it looks good, don't tell me that, because I'm very proud of it. And then I'd probably budget another £500 for kind of like bits and bobs, like the sockets that we have. There's a radiator in here. We did a bit of landscaping around just to kind of make it look nice. And like I said, that's not including the cost of the furniture, because quite frankly, your taste is potentially different to mine. I don't know. If I had to put that number in, the furniture's probably costing us a few £1,000s on top of that, but not including the furniture. That means the total cost of building and creating this whole garden office was £11,000. Not a small amount of money by any means. However, when you divide that over maybe the 3 years minimum that I'm going to be working from here, in terms of a monthly cost, that is something that I am very much okay with. In fact, it feels like a really solid investment, because we're also about to find out how much value is added to our flat, which we are assuming is going to be more than what we actually spent on it. So if we girl math that, it's basically free. I mean, it's not, but anyway. Speaking of money, and by the way, I'd love to know, are you surprised by that figure? Do you think that's a lot of money for this? Do you think that's like a good price? I'm just curious to know. In terms of paying for it, I think a really interesting question to consider with something like this is how and whether it can be a business expense. Now, I am not your accountant. I am not a financial advisor, but I'm just sharing what I learned and decided to be true in this process, which is that I did not find a way of paying for the garden office itself as a business expense. So that £8,000 came out of our personal accounts. And the reason that that is what I believe to be the kind of correct way is because this is not like a temporary building. Like, we are not going to take this with us when we move. This is not an asset of Alice Benham Limited. This is an asset of myself and RSM as the owners of this flat. And it's, going to be sold with the flat and add personal value to it. And so I was doing all of this research, chatting with my accountant. It just didn't seem legal or kind of, right for us to expense this, which is obviously a shame. I would have loved to claim the VAT back and get it off my tax return. But in my opinion, you can't expense a garden office like this that is kind of permanent. However, what you can expense is basically everything else in it. So the analogy that my accountant used with me was, if you shook the garden office, whatever would come out, you can pay for out of your business account. So the chair I'm sat on right now, my business paid for this. My desk, all of the kind of bits and bobs paid for by the business. But the actual build itself, and even getting the kind of trades in to plaster, etc., not paid for by the business. So just something to consider there of like, yes, it is for my business, but not all of it can be a business expense, which obviously just changes, from a kind of tax and VAT perspective, it not necessarily being as lucrative as it could be. However, I would always rather be safe than sorry when it comes to things like that. So that is how we paid for it. And yeah, that might be helpful for you to know if you're thinking of buying a garden office as well. Rounding off this Q&A, I want to finish with a final question of how this garden office has impacted my business and me so far. Now, I've only been in this space with it being finished for about a week and a half, so I can't give you any long-term data here, but I can say very confidently that this is a game changer. I cannot tell you how it felt on that first day when all the furniture was in and it felt that kind of cozy, calm, productive space, how it felt to walk through this door and just be in the zone. When you run a business, you have no structure, right? You don't have colleagues, you don't have tech systems built for you, you don't have working hours set by someone else, you don't have a rhythm that anyone else is in control of. And yes, we love that, right? We want autonomy, we don't want to be told what to do, but it also means that all of that structure has to come from you. And I found over the last year, not having a physical space was exhausting, because I was constantly having to like force myself to get in the zone and create this structure, even though I didn't feel like I had a space physically that felt intentional or represented any kind of structure of my business. And actually now I've got the garden office, it feels so different. This is basically the only kind of physical representation of my business, the only structure outside of me that exists. And that makes such a difference. Like having a space that when I'm in it, I feel like I'm in the zone. I'm not having to work as hard to be self-disciplined or to like get my brain in gear. And it just feels good. Like, it's a space that feels elevated. I feel like it's like the best version of me, the representation in this office and the design. And it's just capturing a kind of energy, I guess, that I really want to embody in my work, but it's very hard to embody if you're not in a space that really creates that for you. So already it's bringing a whole lot of ease. It definitely makes me feel very happy to walk in here, and I turn my music on before I even get in here. So when I walk in, it's like this lovely atmosphere. And from a work-life balance perspective, obviously I can't see long-term results yet, but it's so nice to feel like there's this separation. Also the fact that it's not in the house, like I can't just pop in very quickly. I've got to like open 2 doors, put Crocs on, put my slippers on. Like there's a little bit of friction, which I think also makes it more intentional, coming in here in the evening has to be a real choice rather than if it's just a room in the house, I can kind of have slipped in previously. And not working in the living room all day means that now when I'm in the living room in the evening or the morning, it's like, this is such a nice, calm space. So far, love it. So far, very worth it. And I feel like that is only going to continue. So there we have it. That is a Q&A about this garden office. If you have more questions that you would like me to answer, please feel free to share them in the comments. I will very, very happily talk about any part of this process. Or if you have a question about the build, RSM, I'm sure will be very happy to give me some answers to give you, because that man is to credit for 90% of this coming to life. It would not have happened without him. And yeah, I feel incredibly grateful. Another person I feel incredibly grateful to is the amazing Franny. I met Franny over 5 years ago when she was a one-to-one client of mine. We've stayed connected ever since, and she has been the interior design brain behind this space in terms of everything. I've never worked with an interior designer before, so it was so fun and genuinely blew me away, like how easeful it made the process, because she helped us work out layouts. We looked at mood boards, we picked a color scheme. She then sorted kind of budgets, furniture. It still felt like I had a ton of kind of influence and control, but an expert's an expert, right? Like her eye just made such a difference to this space. And an amazing part of her process as well is that everything got delivered to her. And then we had this install day where her and her team came, set everything up, took the packaging away. And it was just this like transformation where everything just came to life. Franny has put together a blog post sharing more of her process and kind of how this came to life. So if you're interested by like how we got here and the different decisions and also some of the things that went wrong in the interior process, and I say went wrong, you know, just unexpected challenges, make sure to go and have a read of that blog post. It's really interesting. It captures the journey so well. And I think you can learn a lot from it in terms of what an interior designer really does and like, you know, their eye of why they make certain decisions. So I'm going to link that in the description. Like I said, if you're new to this channel, please make sure that you subscribe so that you can see more content moving forwards. I've got a lot of episodes coming over the coming months about how to set yourself up for growth in Q4, also into 2026. So I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching this one and happy new garden office to me.